Thank you, Adrian. So welcome back after lunch, everybody. I'll just quickly move down the panel here and they can do their own introductions to explain who they are, and then we'll come back and we'll get cracking. So Ken, over to you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Ken Brinston from Pilbara Minerals. I'm Managing Director at Pilbara Minerals. We're developing the Pilgangoora lithium tantalum project in the Pilbara, not far from Port Hedland, and in production from about this time next year.
Hi, I'm Bethwyn Coucher. I'm Legal Manager for Power and Energy at Fortescue Metals Group. We're a large iron ore company, if you don't know, up in the Pilbara. We have a number of remote mine sites that have islanded generation and looking to build renewables into that portfolio.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul Volant. I'm the General Manager for Business Development with TNG. We're developing the Mount Peak vanadium, titanium and iron project in the Northern Territory and a refinery up in Darwin to process these three commodities.
Yes, I'm Mark Savage from Agribin. We're developing the Lake Mackay potash project, which is in Western Australia here on the border of WA and Northern Territory. And it's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, guys. Just like to welcome our panellists to the stage. Thank you. Look, I think today should be quite an interesting session, sort of some good conversation and some thought-provoking ideas. Remote mining operations already have some fairly significant challenges from an electricity point of view, whether that be spinning reserve management or large equipment starting requirements. So sometimes long and skinny distribution lines and systems, and of course their physically remote nature. And renewables penetration into these sorts of networks presents some fairly unique challenges and issues, and our panellists today will be sharing some insights into how they're considering and working through those sorts of issues. So I'm sure the conversation is going to have some good questions that you'll be thinking of as we go through. We're going to have some time at the end for questions, so if I can ask you to hang on to those, and then we'll have some roving microphones around at the end for some challenging questions back to the panel. So with that, I might kick that off and go to our first question. And it provides some background into existing energy requirements on mine sites. So Ken, I might direct this first question to you initially. In terms of your operations, or where you've been working previously as well, so particular energy profiles, cost realities and current energy goals of remote mining operations. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it sort of feels like it's stating the obvious, but intense energy consumption is typically associated with a mine site, and of course you have that the tyranny of distance, often not accessible, or not existing infrastructure is not accessible. All of that translates to cost, and therefore at a mine site it's often the case, if not, I'd say almost certainly the case, that actually power is a really significant cost in your business, and actually that's the case at our Pilgangoora site. Given its significance as a cost centre, it obviously cops a lot of attention, and in our case we're looking for a trade-off between security of supply, continuity of supply and cost, and actually in the end the conclusion that we've come to is that it's probably the case that renewables become part of the solution over time. It's already economic, probably going to continue to become cheaper in years to come, in which case it's something that we would be very much keen to deploy. And it kind of closes the loop, if you like, around the Pilgangoora mine, raw lithium, raw material supplier. Batteries are going to become a key part of the renewable solution. That seems obvious, and probably sooner than people think, and we'd love to be able to deploy that at Pilgangoora.
So in terms of sort of energy goals, and maybe I might throw this open to the rest of the panel, it's always difficult. We heard some conversation this morning around mines that have a limited life. I mean, we may be talking 5 or 7 years in some cases. How are you guys going and trying to make that judgment across timeframes, trying to get renewables in? How does that work?
Well, from our point of view with Agribin, when we went out and you could say we're operating on the most remote mining project in Australia, right out in the middle of nowhere. So we knew straight away from the outset that we needed things to change. We needed technology to be better, and we needed a mine life that could support capital investment, because obviously as you deploy more capital, your operating costs will come down, you can be a lot more competitive. So we put mining tenements over Lake Mackay 3 years ago. We'd started looking at the industry about 4 or 5 years ago, and it's changed a lot. But even back then we knew that if there wasn't an improvement in technology, the project wouldn't work. Like most mines, you're lucky if you get a big discovery, but most of the time you're finding that they're lower grade, more remote, more challenging, and you need technology to keep moving along to make that work. So it was eyes wide open for us, and that's why we're here today and we're looking at renewables, because that's what we need to make the project work.
I think one of the questions or the information we heard this morning was just on the volatility of diesel fuel pricing and how that can have an impact on generation, obviously, but also on the ability for renewables to be considered as part of the mix. So maybe Bethwyn, in terms of FMG's perspective on fuel volatility, it's a different case for you guys. You're obviously a lot bigger and you've got some different contracting arrangements, but do you see that as being a big issue for you guys at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Fuel volatility and the bankability of renewable is a very fine line at the moment for us in remote islanded power stations. Without a grid, we are relying on additional generation from renewables to be installed, but we then need, to Ken's point, the security of supply. We run a 24-hour day, 7-day operation. So in some circumstances, it means that we're considering putting in backup generation to support a renewable, which then doesn't make financial sense. So for us, it's that fine line when the commodity price, especially a diesel price, is really low. We have a challenge to have it stack up.
So maybe, Paul, a question for you. We'll move on to the second question. So in terms of those challenges we've been talking about, mining leaders addressing those sorts of challenges, how are you seeing that functioning at both a strategic level, and sort of CEO board levels, and then down into operational levels as well?
Yeah. So I guess from the point of view of addressing the energy challenge, we're probably still at a very early stage in the mining industry. From a strategic perspective, project with very large capex and potential high risk are fairly risk averse to explore new avenues for energy, because there's no clear pathway towards financing and historical data to really benchmark against our project. But I guess from a strategic perspective, we need to recognize that we have to be more proactive rather than reactive, and we need to look at this project from a very early stage to really understand the best options for our energy mix and a solution that is adapted to a specific project.
I think we heard this morning, Eva was talking about a particular example where a conventional fuel generation plant might take a fairly short amount of time to get internal approvals to get up and away in an organisation, a mining organisation. But a renewables project for similar size could be pushing out for 2 years for that same sort of approval. From a strategic point of view or a strategy point of view at sort of CEO level and those areas, how do you improve on that? Or is that a problem that you see at the moment? And how do you give direction to try and improve that time frame?
The land occupied, that becomes a sort of key issue from an approvals point of view. I guess you could say you're lucky in Australia, there's plenty of backyard to work with, so that's it's just a function of time. So if that was the only problem, you'd say, okay, you'd bite the bullet, look for an interim solution, and that's the conclusion that we'd come to. Really conventional power station deployed, something that's relatively easily redeployed at a future date and then replaced with a long-term solution. And we've structured ourselves contractually so that we can achieve that, and ultimately with a view to helping deploy the required renewable solution. So I think it can be worked around, and a bit sort of light on your feet, a bit nimble, and the solution's there for the taking.
Can I just add to Ken's point? I think part of the challenge for big corporates especially is a learning experience and education for boards and executives around renewables and how they are reliable it's new for big mining companies, I think, but it's not new technology. The transformation that the industry has undergone in the last particularly 5 years since I've started looking at solar PV, for example, is phenomenal. And the cost reduction and the technology development is outstanding. And I think taking senior executives and boards and people in decision-making roles along that journey as well is really important, because the first thing they'll do for security of supply and reliability when you're running a big 24-hour-a-day 7 operation is think, I know how diesel works and I know how gas works, and there's a market for that, and I'm really comfortable in that space. So one of the big challenges I think the renewable industry has is getting into those corporates and showing, hey guys, look, we can add on to what you've already got, or we can help you develop what you already have, and we're as efficient and we're as cost effective, and we add additional layers of benefit to the community, and it's the right thing to do from a corporate social responsibility perspective. And then you start thinking, oh, hey, executives, look, this works and this is okay, there's no security issues, and I think that's a really big point.
I think from an operating level, so that's sort of, we've been talking a little bit about the strategic level. Down at an operating level, you know, there's a challenge to try and get some of those thoughts from strategy actually into practice. And if you're looking at energy efficiency or demand management, it's always very tricky trying to get mining managers to change their behaviours because there's a demand management requirement rather than you know, production at all costs. So do you see issues in trying to push those strategies down into the actual operating level to see those outcomes coming out of your operations?
I think it has to be a business focus. I think if you're looking at employing something like a renewable, and you need to make sure that you're supporting your mine managers to make those decisions and to enable them to be empowered to do that, because if you're going to keep them in a small box and not let them move around, then and treat them in the same way in some cases as a diesel or a conventional gas turbine, and not give them a bit of flexibility, it's a different technology. And I think it's really a corporate level buy-in to renewables, I think.
Look, Mark, thanks, Beth. Mark, I might start with you on the third question then. So, Agrimin's, this is your project, the sulphate of potash development. You're planning to use pretty large evaporation ponds, so I guess you could say you're already in the renewable space, right? You're going to be using a lot of solar. But with respect to electricity generation, so how are mines, or how are you addressing the potential for alternative energy to address your energy concerns? What are you guys looking at?
Yeah, so firstly, our project's a little bit different. Every mining project's very unique. Ours, we're looking to extract groundwater out of the salt lake, pump it into very large solar evaporation ponds. We're using the sun's energy, we'll crystallise potassium-bearing salts, and then we'll harvest those salts and put them through a processing plant. So when you look at our power profile, 70% of it is actually heating water to 55 degrees Celsius for our processing plant. So it's quite unique, and that was one of the reasons we thought that early on, before we'd done any work, surely there should be a solar solution to this, some sort of solar thermal heating that we could use. And that's sort of still the path that we're moving down now. So we're looking at flat plate technology, using purely water to store the heat for all seasons. Very similar to the strategies used in Northern Europe for district heating. And we're working with a Danish group at the moment on that. And then the power load for the electrical load is quite small, so it's only 7 megawatts for our operation. There's no crushing, no milling, so mostly it's all pumps. So that part of that part of the power load we haven't looked at as closely because it's going to have less impact on us. But looking at that water heating has been a real priority for us. The alternative being big burners with diesel or gas. It's probably not ideal for us. So yeah, that's internally how we've looked at that is just really looking through all the options, talking to as many people as possible. We're a small company, so it's more talking to obviously investors as well about what they're willing to invest in and back going forward.
So maybe, Ken, for the project that you've got close to kicking off, so in terms of the assessment process that you guys have gone through when you've been considering renewables, how complicated has that process been?
Look, it hasn't been complicated, but not that many. But there's not that well a proven path. A couple of developments of the scale that we'd look to deploy, and we've been keen to learn as much as we can from them. The good news, and Bethwyn alluded to it earlier, is the speed with which the industry is changing is just phenomenal, and exactly the same phenomenon that's unfolded and still unfolding in solar panel costs is now happening in batteries. So batteries will increasingly become part of the solution, buffering power, that sort of thing. And really, it's just a discipline, isn't it? Going through the gates, pre-feasibility study, definitive feasibility study, and ultimately tendering to deploy what we'd expect to be a pretty cost-effective solution for us as compared to conventional remote power supply.
Thanks, Ken. Bethwyn, let's move into the fourth question. So we've heard some really interesting presentations this morning on renewables opportunities in mining. So from your perspective, what are the main barriers for integrating these sorts of new technologies, and how are FMG considering addressing those sorts of issues?
So I think there's two main barriers at the moment, and one for us is in the Pilbara with no grid, and having that remote power supply does make it a little bit trickier in terms of making sure that we have constant power supply and we don't have any backup. So that for us is tricky, and we're trying to manage that in terms of how we currently run our plants. The second point, I think, is around technology change, and because the industry has changed so significantly and the technology is developing so quickly, when you enter into the market is a big issue for us. So we don't want to enter too early, but we don't want to miss the boat either, and trying to get that balance and read the market as to where it's at is difficult.
How important do you think it is to have champions for renewables energy in organisations when we're trying to push through some of these barriers? Is that
really important? I think that's absolutely key, and I think to your point that you raised earlier around two different processes, gas power station and a renewable power station, and the difference in time it's taking to get those two things considered by an approvals process. The same thing applies to an internals approvals process. So there's other benefits to renewables that aren't just financial, and part of that is the education point that I think I mentioned earlier about boards and executives, and the other part is having a really strong internal team that's committed and making sure that it's committed and educated from, exactly as you mentioned before, mine manager all the way up, and you've got buy-in, and I think that really makes a difference.
I think one of the things we heard this morning from Australian Garnet, and that they were talking about the challenges of wind integration in a small generation plant, and what that impact is on spinning reserve, and what that can mean to the overall economics of the project. In terms of that sort of technology and getting down to that level of resolution of data, we were chatting about that a bit earlier, Mark. You know, that's a level of detail that sometimes it gets missed.
Sure, I think that's often a problem. We're at pre-feasibility stage, so we've completed a scoping study, we've done a lot of work, but all of the forecasts you generally get are always flat lines. And it was really interesting from Mike's presentation where you see that that's actually not flat and there's a lot of variation year to year. And those are the main concerns that we have when you're working through thinking about this. At an early stage it looks easy, but you know in the back of your mind there's a lot of complications and variations that are going to come through over time, and that's something you need to think about. Especially when we've been looking at renewables, the economics often at this point in time are sort of no-brainers. It's trying to think how you're going to get a buy-in from investors about and be able to raise the capital that's needed to put it in place.
Just to add to Mark's point about the integration point, we've had a similar issue when we've looked at wind or solar integrating to diesel plants, and how that affects the maintenance profile where the power's coming on and off from the renewable, and what that does to the diesels. And it's a bit easier for us to manage in a diesel engine. We've got small 2 megawatt units that are easy to manage, but we have a very large oversized gas power station at Solomon, and we've got a pretty good wind resource there, but integrating wind in that resource, at that power station, with the impact on spinning reserve and how it affects the maintenance because of the load profile is difficult.
So I think, again, we heard a couple of presentations this morning talking about just the importance of demonstrated performance. You know, without that background, I mean, it's very difficult, obviously, to look at financing and putting a proposal up if you haven't got something you can demonstrate or show that it's been functioning previously. So, Paul, maybe for you, this is one for you around technology. So, in terms of technology concerns that in general miners have around renewables meeting their energy needs. So what do you see as the big technology concerns at the moment?
Yeah, well, I guess the main concerns we've discussed already are the bankability of this process, the reliability of this process. One concern perhaps also is the fact that with this technology that are improving very fast, you know, people tend to want to delay the decision as much as possible because they think the next generation is coming and it will be even better. At TNG, we decided very early on to engage with the technology providers to really understand where we are in the technology curve. So we have an agreement with EMC, which is a local Perth company, system integrator, and Sumitomo of Japan, that is the leading global producer of VRB. And we find this cooperation very useful in understanding at what point will the new technology be optimal to address the needs at our mine site. So yeah, I guess it's quite important for miners to engage very early on with the system providers.
And I know this is a question around technology, but I think it also leads into the ongoing support requirements. I mean, it's very difficult, obviously, without having that ongoing support and a commitment around that support to be able to put a foot forward and say, well, we're happy to go down this technology path on renewables. In terms of maybe the level of due diligence that you guys do in looking at that ongoing support capability, is there any thoughts on what you've been doing in that space, or how far you need to go down the track to make sure you're confident you've got that support available?
For us, we're at an early stage, so one of the tricky things is you're always learning more about your project, about your power profile, your power requirements, and then it's that loop of trying to feed it into your power solutions, and then you find out more about the project, and it's always ongoing. So we're a few months away from finishing the pre-fees, so we'll be at that point trying to draw a line in the sand and pull in all the information we've got to hand and choose a power solution at that point that fits with what we're doing. But yeah, it's a balancing act. You just never always have all the information. You wish you have more project information early on so you can make those decisions, but it's a challenge that we have.
And I guess from a due diligence perspective, it's also, you know, very relevant to engage with the technology provider early on. I mean, they have their hands-on the technology. They look at that every day. They also have a vast experience of different projects across the globe that they can compare your particular project to. So I think it's also, from a due diligence perspective, very interesting to talk to technology providers.
Thanks, Paul. Bethwyn, so in terms of sort of contract terms and flexibility from renewables power purchase agreements, from your perspective, are you seeing a level of complexity in trying to get renewables PPAs up versus your more standard type PPAs with conventional generation?
Yeah, so I think it's changed significantly in the last, my views are probably the last 18 to 24 months. Previously, we were seeing a lot of PPAs that needed essentially finance. So we were banking projects and having a firm offtake arrangement with a rate of return and no flexibility. That's hard for us to do. It requires a long-term view often and required a 15 to 20-year commitment, and that's the technology change is something that we are a bit worried about in terms of making sure we get the right fit, to exactly Paul's point. So now we're seeing a monumental shift, I think, in flexibility from the industry, and it's just been fantastic. So being able to access shorter term arrangements, sharing on upside and downside is something that we're really keen to do. And I think with renewable players that fit that that kind of bracket, they're innovative, happy to look at different commercial structures, then I think they'll do really well, because that's exactly what the industry needs, and we're happy to contract for power on that basis, because I think a long-term arrangement is a trickier one when we're entering a new market.
Yeah, having just tendered our power supply contract, we were, I think, pleasantly surprised as to how much flexibility was shown by the sort of the existing sort of pool, if you like, of power providers, and the extent to which they're prepared to be flexible about future renewable solutions and how they could be plugged in. So I felt like we got a healthy level of engagement from the industry in that regard, and you know, they are seeing the future, and clearly it's going to involve renewables.
So, do you think miners? How do miners value the sort of electricity supply chain then, into varying out PPAs and maybe going out to an external provider versus having certainty of supply and potentially an impact on reliability? You can obviously contract that through PPAs. I mean, obviously, I think you've gone in the PPA path. Beth, and you're in PPA territory, I think, for all your operations.
We have a mix. We have owner-operator and PPA.
Yeah. Okay. So and I know there are other operations, obviously, that have taken a different path down that area. So from your perspective, so PPAs and being able to manage reliability of supply, which is obviously very key. They're confident in terms of your ability to extract what you need out of that for your operations?
I think part of it is picking the right business to fit the right company. So for Fortescue, we're probably a company that is very innovative. We're happy to spend time and help develop more innovative technologies, and then take the risk reward associated with that. So I think it's a tricky one, and you do sometimes have to consider whether cost and security of supply and reliability, they are often at odds with each other, but you have to consider the whole package deal. I think you probably have a similar experience.
Yeah, I think buying ourselves a bit of time to run with while we're stabilising our plant and going through the delivering a more reliable solution over time. The combination of that has also bought us time for the application of renewable solutions, and obviously our expectation is that we'll resolve a lot of the issues that you're describing within that period of time.
So I guess the other part of that question around the renewables piece is there opportunity for benefits if you've gone down the path of renewables on your project beyond the energy savings and the power security elements? So is there another opportunities that can present themselves with the off-grid sort of renewables supply, one of the ones that you're looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. So whilst you might have a remote mining operation, typically you're interacting with somebody, and they have their own requirements and their own expectations about what the mine might be able to do for them and help. In our case, it's the pastoralists, it's the claimant groups, the mines next door. There's lots of opportunities to consider aggregating supply and becoming a service provider. There was a comment earlier about how does the industry show some leadership. I think you've got to give credit where credit's due. The CEFC, and their ability to demonstrate some leadership and investment in the renewables scene, I think, is fantastic, and actually a really clear signal that there's economic merit in what they're pursuing. We'd say a similar conversation sort of going on now with the Northern Australian Infrastructure Fund. Common source power, they can facilitate finance solutions for those sorts of things. And yeah, there's a bigger picture to be won than just your singular view about the mining enterprise.
I was having a conversation over lunch around one of the comments that Ivor talked about when he flew out to Grusa, and he was on the plane with some of the workforce, and they were expressing their feedback around the solar plant that had gone in there. And that sort of got me thinking around the motivation and the engaged workforce benefits that you get out of these sorts of things. I mean, there's a lot of interest in renewables around the country, not just in the mining space. So in terms of, that's not a financial benefit, but an engaged workforce can have some financial benefits down the track. Does that figure into any of the thinking, from across the patch here? Does that figure into any of your thinking around renewables and what that might do for the workforce and the non-tangible benefits that you can get out of that?
Yes. For me, it's exciting to think that we could have a big solar farm out there. Absolutely. And then also, it's exciting to think that we could have our power costs locked away in our own control for a long period of time. So 100%, that's all what you aspire to do. Whether you get there is then a bit more of a realistic analysis of how does it stack up economically, and obviously got to raise the capital, and shareholders need to get a return on that capital as well. So there's a lot more to it after that, but I think as a company we would much prefer to have a solar farm out there than a diesel generated power station.
I think the community piece that you've raised is spot on. So financially, sometimes these things can be a bit marginal with solar, or which is what we've been looking at, or diesel. But the extra benefit you get, those non-tangible benefits about the social licence to operate for a start, but secondly, an engaged workforce. Everyone's engaged, they love it. It's a new project. It's clean. It's where the world is headed, and I think the cost-benefit analysis on those non-tangible benefits is something that has to be factored in, that you can't put into an Excel spreadsheet and sell.
Yeah, it's almost got to the point now where I think we can move the debate on. It's not so much a question about where we should be investing. Actually, the economics will dictate, if it's not already, that in the very short term, renewables will be a logical solution. And yeah, it's great to be a part of that, and hopefully our workforce would see that the same way. They're part of a bigger picture, which just makes sense for the entire world.
Thanks, Ken. I'll talk to the last question. I might point to you on this one as well, Mark. So the question relates to energy profiles. What do we see in the 5 or 10 year time frame from mining operations? What do we think we're likely to see? And I guess to me, some of the things I can imagine that we can see are obviously the penetration of PV, maybe in villages and camps and those sorts of things on mines, where you can see maybe an immediate reduction and some benefits there with some storage. I guess I'm seeing obviously all existing operations are trying to squeeze the assets, right? They're trying to do more with what they've got. That's going to have an impact on demand profiles and load and obviously generation. And similarly, there's a lot of development now. If you look at the big miners around sustaining tonnes, right, and the sustaining tonnes are getting further away from the processing plants, and that's going to have an impact on generation and transmission. But in terms of your perspective, Mark, what do you, if you look in your crystal ball, what do you see over the next sort of 5 or 10 years in terms of changes in load profiles?
Oh, look, I think what you said about distance is key. Grades are going to get lower, obviously. So cost per tonne, power per tonne of ore processed, emissions per tonne is going to increase. So if you think further out, we're only going to be processing more and more waste rock, which is going to burn a lot of energy anyway. So naturally, there's going to have to be a shift towards renewables just to control your emissions. So I think, yeah, renewables is a pretty obvious place that the industry has to move over time.
No other thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think it's obviously very difficult to imagine the magnitude of change, and especially within 5 years. But there's a clear understanding that there's only one way, right? It's going to improve. It's going to get better and better. I think that we might tend to overestimate what's going to happen in 1 or 2 years. When we look at everybody talking here, maybe things are going to take a bit longer to happen, but we probably also have a tendency to underestimate what's going to happen in 10 years. So I think if we sit here in 10 years, we'll see a lot of change.
All right. Thank you, panellists. So that's the end of the prepared questions. We've got a couple of roving microphones, don't we, Adrian? We've got one, and maybe we'll have to pinch one of these ones.
Oh, there we go.
You should have had all the time. So look, open to the floor. So we've probably gone a little bit over time, but we've got some time left for questions. So
there's one back
there. Hi, I'm Roy Mitchell from One Tide Modular Systems, just the little booth at the end there. Interesting to to hear it. It's actually Mark, I'm actually aiming this at. Ultra remote power supply systems is what we do. The more remote, the more excited we get. I believe I've got a solution for your mine, and I'd love to be able to at least come and have a chat to you and give you some of the things that I think I can help make your mine fly. And also it may be some links with possibly Arena. I'm a small company as well. We're using lots of oil field and military technology, which is it's a bit of a game changer as far as being able to put power where no one else can. And just for the rest of everyone, it's just great to have everyone in the room that's kind of excited on moving forward with the renewable system. So I'm offers open to come and have a chat.
Great, I appreciate that. I think that's the great thing about the industry, mining industry, is that with most projects, unless you're lucky enough to have a great discovery, most of the time you're doing something that most people say you can't do because it's too low grade, or it's too far away, or you can't get landowner approvals, or you're not going to get environmental approvals. There's a million reasons why most people would say it's too hard, but we'd love to catch up and see if we can find a good solution.
Next question.
Hi, Dr. Alex Lee from Jinko Solar. So renewable energy has been proven to be a reliable and low-cost technology since the 1980s. And we know that it can help to reduce the cost from the diesel by 90%. Then what is the challenge that slows down the renewable energy getting into penetrating deeper into the mining sector? Is it still a technical issue, a financial issue, a social issue, or a political issue? Thanks for that.
Well, I might have a quick crack at that one for a start. Maybe I'll pass it down to the panel. But I think certainly financial clearly has been a problem in the past, and it's marginal at the moment, but getting certainly better. I think one of the interesting things for renewables, and particularly when they're working on mining sites like in WA, the regulatory framework that renewables are being installed under is the Mine Safety Inspection Act or the Mine Safety Inspection Regulations. And those requirements are somewhat a little bit different, or a bit more than what some of the vendors have found in the past. And compliance with the requirements and the regulations is a bit tricky, and it's a bit of an effort to try and get that across the line sometimes. And I think certainly on some of if you look at a gold plant, for instance, there's some big loads to deal with. So you've got mill starts and those sorts of things, which are challenging the best of times to deal with a conventional generation. And renewables is a bit of a challenge sometimes to meet those very large load start requirements. So I think there's been some challenges with that, probably more financial than anything, but I'll pass it down the panel.
Yeah, Alex, I actually think the answer is really clear. Once you got past the question of economics, the next barrier that you hit is access to capital. And mining companies, I think historically, would typically have said the cost of capital is too high. If you're a junior or a mid-tier company, you're typically doing your best to raise money for the commencement of a mine, let alone the application of dual power solutions, renewable and a baseload power solution. So I think the access to capital has really been the biggest barrier to entry. But increasingly, I think people are finding solutions, and there has been some intervention. I mentioned CEFC earlier. They are taking a leadership role and saying, well, no, the economics, they do make sense. If you've got access to the capital, we'll provide the capital, and that's definitely helping.
Do we have any more questions? I know we're running out of time, but yes, just down the front here.
Michael Scott and Rio Tinto again. For the mining companies, safety is quite an important concern for us. So I was just wondering across the panellists, in the context of renewables, has anything from a safety perspective, or even perhaps from a closure perspective, caused you to look at either a benefit or perhaps a risk around renewable options that you're looking at?
Yeah, from Agrimin's point of view, probably not yet. We haven't been looking at those impacts on our business yet, but I'm sure it'll come over the next few years.
So I'm just trying to think of a case where renewables sort of safety environment might be somewhat different from sort of conventional generation.
So a couple of examples that we've sort of come across in our organisation. So you've got lithium ion, which is a no fire risk with some of the technologies. There's a question about how in remote sites you fight those fires. Solar panels, cadmium in them, so you've got a disposal issue around the panels there. What do you do with those when they reach end of life? So, did you want to repeat that?
Look, I'm not sure from a closure. I mean, I think a lot of those questions relate to closure and materials handling at the end. Lithium-ion battery is an interesting one. Ken, you might want to talk to that too.
Yeah, no, it's a question that actually comes up a fair bit, and my response typically sort of reverts to, you might have seen the odd Tesla burst into flames, but I guarantee you there's been a few BMWs, Porsches and Lamborghinis that have gone up in flames over the years. They all carry in some way, shape or form a flammable source, and it just so happens that in an electric car it's the battery, but in your petrol car it's the petrol tank. And for those reasons, people come up with useful solutions and safety measures are in place to deal with it. And also the reality is that the industry just increasingly year on year gets better and better at the quality control that ultimately makes a better battery. And the technology continues to improve, so you'll see that risk diminish over the years.
So we'll just a couple more questions. Adrian, we going okay for time? Yep.
Hi, Davin Brelowitz from Texi Investments. Just as utility scale renewables has challenged conventional power costs and become very competitive with conventional power costs. In the conventional renewable industry, the single thing that's brought down those costs is the cost of solar panels. That's really made the industry competitive and created a lot of competition in that industry. What in your view will bring down the cost of hybrid renewable energies in the mining space, in the off-grid space? What is that single factor that is going to reduce the cost of energy and make it competitive with conventional off-grid generation?
No, it is a really good question. When I think about the next big change that's coming in the renewable space, I think it all revolves around batteries, because my view is that the batteries are going to become much cheaper, much faster than people are currently assuming, in which case it's a bit of a virtuous circle in the renewables world. As the batteries become cheaper, they get deployed more fulsomely, and they continue to defend the renewable system. They can't do that outright, so I'm not so naive as to expect that they become, for example, the nighttime solution. But do they become part of a system that becomes more stable and therefore is easier to deploy? And I'd say the answer is clearly yes, and it's happening very, very quickly. The Chinese are the game changers. They're building lithium-ion battery factories like there's no tomorrow, and with that comes the economies of scale that lower the cost of the batteries in the same way that the solar panel industry has been transformed in the last 5 to 10 years. So that's happening right now with respect to the battery world.
And I think we had one more question.
Hi, good afternoon. It's Glenn Ellis from Shell New Energies. First, I just want to say many congratulations in terms of the breadth of the dialogue that we're having this afternoon. I cannot imagine that we could have had this discussion 12 months ago or 18 months ago, and a credit to everyone in terms of the level of knowledge that the industry's got up to in this space. I wanted to ask a question with respect to, there was a lot of referencing back to financing and the ability to bring these systems onto your collective mine sites. And I see on the panel we've got some large companies and maybe not so large companies, so there may be some differences of opinion on attitudes in terms of owning the system itself. There's a lot more willingness and flexibility with commercial contracting systems. if the PPA is there, then there is a breadth of developers who are willing to actually bring those systems to you. The question is more about internally. I know there are some challenges that there's a lot of passion inside many companies. We have a lot of engineers and scientists who like these systems and want to get involved. But are you beginning to see any preference in terms of wanting to have control of your own systems and developing and owning and building and owning your own assets, as opposed to having another entity coming in and building and developing those systems for you?
I can talk for Fortescue, and we definitely love to be in control of our own destiny. So we have looked at a range of options, including, exactly as you said, we've had PPA options or having a turnkey option. We are open to any type of arrangement as long as we get the best outcome, and the best outcome depends on where we're putting it, what the cost is, but also what the security of supply is and the reliability and the support from the business that we're getting, which I think was your point, Craig, around the technical support that we can rely on, because we're new in this space. We need you guys to help us get comfortable with the technology and use it on a remote site. So I think in terms of contracting and contracting structure, we personally, as a bigger company, so we probably have more flexibility than some of the smaller ones, are open to any type of arrangement as long as it works for both parties. And I think that's been a real change from both mining companies and the renewable space.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that investors are more willing to see companies bring those types of assets on balance sheet. That's the feeling we're getting from discussions. So, for us to add that number to our CapEx, obviously, raises that funding hurdle. But if you can integrate it into your business and it becomes more and more important to your operation, which it will be for us, I think you want to try and keep control over it. So, exactly as you said, there's a lot of discussion going back and forth with investors. What are they willing to put money into? How much can you raise? Can you fund it? But I think there is a bit of a shift in their mentality about mining companies bringing more and more of the operations into their control, and Fortescue sort of led that from a number of angles, and it's been, they've been really successful in driving down operating costs and having a sustainable business. So I don't think, as any mining company, why you wouldn't try and repeat that over time.
Right, I think we are probably out of time now. Oh, we've got one more?
No.
No, that's it? Okay. Look, I'd just like to thank the panellists today. I think they've had a really good open conversation about a whole range of topics, which I'm sure you'd agree has been pretty valuable. So would you please join me in thanking our panellists today?